Commander Sarah Chen stood before the massive viewscreen in Earth's orbital command center, watching the alien fleet that had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Even at maximum magnification, the Zephyrian Armada appeared as nothing more than a cloud of distant stars, but the numbers on her tactical display told a different story. 7,200,000 warships, each one larger than anything in humanity's small fleet. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Torres said from the communications station, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. It's being broadcast on all frequencies, in 17 different languages." "Put it through," Chen ordered, straightening her uniform jacket. She had commanded Earth's defenses for 8 years, had overseen humanity's first tentative steps into galactic politics, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The view screen shifted to show a being that looked like a cross between a mantis and a spider, standing nearly 3 meters tall. Its forearms moved in precise, mechanical gestures as it spoke, its voice a harsh clicking that the universal translator converted into cold, emotionless words. "I am War Prime Zektar of the Zephyrian hegemony. By the ancient laws of conquest, I claim dominion over the system you call Sol and all worlds within. Your species has violated the hegemony's territorial boundaries by establishing colonies in the Kepler system. This transgression demands correction." Chen felt her jaw clench. The Kepler colonies, humanity's first successful attempt at interstellar expansion. 3 small research outposts on barely habitable worlds, each housing fewer than 1,000 people. The Zephyrians were mobilizing 7 million ships to destroy 3 tiny settlements. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to evacuate all human presence from Zephyrian space and surrender your homeworld to our occupation forces. Failure to comply will result in the complete sterilization of your species. This is the only warning you will receive. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Around the room, officers stared at their displays, some openly weeping, others frozen in shock. The math was simple and terrifying. Humanity's entire military consisted of just over 400 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels pressed into service when Earth joined the Galactic Council. Against 7 million Zephyrian warships, they might as well throw rocks. "Ma'am," Torres whispered, "what are your orders?" Chen closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the 3 billion people on Earth below, the 500,000 colonists scattered across 12 worlds, the children who would never grow up if humanity chose to fight this battle conventionally. When she opened her eyes again, her expression was calm, determined. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Morrison at Luna Base. Then, patch me through to the Galactic Council chambers on Centauri Prime." Within minutes, the viewscreen split to show Admiral Morrison's weathered face and the ornate council chambers where representatives from 47 species gathered to witness what they assumed would be humanity's surrender. Council Speaker Veltar, an elderly being whose species resembled walking trees, leaned forward with something that might have been sympathy in his ancient eyes. "Commander Chen, we have monitored the Zephyrian ultimatum. The Council deeply regrets this situation, but our laws are clear. Member species must resolve territorial disputes through established protocols or trial by combat. Given the disparity in your respective military strengths, we strongly urge you to accept the hegemony's terms. With respect, Council Speaker, we decline to surrender." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Veltar's bark-like features seemed to sag with disappointment. "Commander, surely you understand the futility of resistance. The Zephyrian hegemony commands the largest military force in known space. Your entire fleet would be destroyed in the opening minutes of any engagement." "Which is why we won't be sending our fleet," Chen replied calmly. Admiral Morrison leaned forward on the split screen, his expression puzzled. "Sarah, what are you talking about? If we're not surrendering and we're not sending the fleet, then what? We're sending one ship." The silence that followed was so complete that Chen could hear the soft humming of the station's life support systems. On the council feed, she could see delegates whispering frantically to their translators, convinced they had misunderstood. Veltar spoke first, his voice heavy with confusion. "Commander, surely you mean one fleet? One battle group? The translation matrix sometimes struggles with human numerical concepts." "No, sir. One ship. One crew."
That's our response to the Zephyrian ultimatum. Admiral Morrison looked like he'd been slapped. Chen, have you lost your mind? One ship against 7 million? That's not a military strategy, that's suicide. Admiral, with respect, sending our entire fleet would also be suicide.
The difference is that losing one ship preserves our defensive capabilities while still meeting the Council's requirement for trial by combat. Sometimes the best way to win an impossible fight is to change the rules of engagement. The Zephyrian Warprime's image suddenly appeared alongside the others as he forced his way into the communication channel. His mandibles clicked with what the translator interpreted as laughter.
The human speaks of changing rules?
There are no rules in war save victory and defeat.
Send your one ship, little human. We will vaporize it as an example to all who would challenge Zephyrian supremacy.
Very well, Chen replied. Under Galactic Council Statute 847, I formally invoke trial by combat to settle this territorial dispute.
The Terran Federation's champion will meet your forces in 71 hours at the coordinates I'm transmitting now. Neutral space, halfway between our systems.
Zektar's forearms spread wide in a gesture of supreme confidence.
Excellent.
We shall bring our full fleet to witness the destruction of your champion. Perhaps other species will learn from your folly. As the alien's image disappeared from the screen, Veltar shook his great head sadly.
Commander Chen, I fear you have sealed your species' fate.
The trial by combat clause was written for conflicts between comparable forces, not this. Still, if this is humanity's choice, the Council will witness and record your sacrifice.
The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with Admiral Morrison's stunned expression on the viewscreen.
Sarah, Morrison said quietly, please tell me you have some kind of plan. Because right now, it looks like you just volunteered someone to commit suicide for the entire human race. Chen turned away from the viewscreen to gaze out at the starfield beyond.
Somewhere out there, 7 million alien warships were beginning their journey to the chosen battleground. In 71 hours, humanity's champion would face them alone.
Get me Captain Rodriguez, she said. And tell him to prep the Indomitable for immediate departure.
Morrison's face went pale.
Captain Miguel Rodriguez commanded humanity's most experimental vessel, a ship so classified that even most admirals didn't know it existed. The Indomitable was built around theories that existed mostly in computer simulations and the fevered dreams of Earth's most brilliant physicists.
Sarah, the Indomitable isn't ready.
Hell, we're not even sure it works the way the theorists claim it should. The antimatter containment systems alone are held together with prayers and wishful thinking. Then, Rodriguez better pray harder, Chen replied grimly. Because in 71 hours, he's going to find out exactly what humans do when someone tells us we can't win.
As Morrison's transmission ended, Chen remained standing before the great viewscreen, watching the distant stars. Somewhere among them, the largest military force in galactic history was moving toward what should be humanity's defeat.
But, Chen had read the old military histories, had studied the battles where impossible odds became famous victories. Sometimes, she knew, the most dangerous opponent was the one who refused to accept that they were beaten. The next 71 hours would determine whether humanity had just made the most brilliant tactical decision in galactic history, or whether they had simply chosen a more dramatic way to die. But, as she watched the stars, Sarah Chen found herself smiling. Because there was something the Zephyrians didn't understand about humans, something that no amount of military superiority could overcome.
Humans had a very long history of doing impossible things out of pure stubbornness.
And Captain Rodriguez was about to prove that some traditions never die. The war for humanity's survival would be decided by a single ship, carrying the hopes of an entire species into a battle that every expert said couldn't be won. But, then, again, experts had once said humans would never fly, never reach the stars, never find their place among the galactic community. Sometimes, Chen reflected, it was good to be wrong. Captain Miguel Rodriguez had always believed that the universe had a sense of humor, but he was beginning to think it might be downright sadistic. 3 hours after Commander Chen's message reached Luna Base, he found himself standing in the docking bay of the most classified military installation in human space, staring at a ship that looked like it had been designed by someone with a serious grudge against the laws of physics.
The Indomitable defied every convention of spacecraft engineering that Rodriguez had learned in his 20-year career.
Where most human ships were built for efficiency and reliability, the Indomitable appeared to have been constructed by people who viewed safety regulations as merely suggestions. Its hull was an irregular amalgamation of exotic materials that seemed to shift color depending on the viewing angle, and the engine section was so heavily shielded that it resembled a miniature fortress.
"She's beautiful, isn't she?"
Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins approached from behind, her voice carrying the pride of someone who had spent 5 years turning theoretical physics into reality. The chief scientist of Project Prometheus was a small woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held the slightly manic gleam of someone who regularly worked with forces that could accidentally destroy solar systems. "She looks like she was built by committee," Rodriguez replied, "and half the committee was drunk. The other half was certifiably insane," Hawkins agreed cheerfully. "But she'll work."
"Probably. The computer models show a 67% chance of success, which is remarkably high for experimental technology." "And the other 33%? Catastrophic failure resulting in the creation of a localized black hole, temporal paradox, or dimensional rift."
"But look on the bright side, if any of those happen, the Zephyrians will have bigger problems than conquering Earth." Rodriguez rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of what promised to be a spectacular headache.
"Dr. Hawkins, in very simple terms, what exactly does this ship do that makes Command think it can survive against 7 million enemy vessels?"
Hawkins's expression grew serious as she gestured toward the ship's unusual engine configuration.
"Miguel, may I call you Miguel, what do you know about quantum entanglement manipulation?" "I know it's theoretical and probably impossible."
"It was theoretical," she corrected. 3 years ago, we achieved stable quantum entanglement between macroscopic objects. 2 years ago, we figured out how to manipulate the entanglement field to affect local spacetime. Last year, we built the first working prototype of what you see before you. They walked closer to the ship, and Rodriguez could see that what he had initially taken for irregular hull plating was actually a complex array of quantum field generators.
The entire vessel seemed to hum with barely contained energy that made his teeth ache.
"The Indomitable can exist in a state of quantum superposition," Hawkins explained, her voice dropping to the excited whisper of a scientist discussing her life's work. "She can literally be in multiple places at the same time, following multiple probability paths simultaneously. To outside observers, she appears to phase in and out of reality."
"That sounds incredibly dangerous."
"Oh, it absolutely is. The first prototype created a temporal loop that lasted 3 weeks.
The second one briefly existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously before we figured out how to bring it back.
But this version is stable."
"Mostly."
Rodriguez stopped walking and turned to face the scientist directly.
"Dr. Hawkins, I need you to understand something. In approximately 67 hours, I'm going to take this ship into combat against impossible odds. The survival of humanity may depend on whatever miracle you've built here. So please, tell me honestly, can this thing actually fight?"
Hawkins was quiet for a moment, her manic enthusiasm fading into something more thoughtful.
"Miguel, the Indomitable wasn't built to fight.
She was built to do something much more important, she was built to survive. The quantum superposition field doesn't just make her hard to target, it makes her nearly impossible to destroy. Enemy weapons fire at where she appears to be, but she's actually existing in a probability cloud of potential positions. Most attacks simply pass through empty space."
"Most attacks? Quantum mechanics is weird," she admitted.
"There's always a small probability that any given shot will hit, regardless of the field. But we've calculated that the Zephyrian fleet would need to fire approximately 200,000 shots per second for 12 continuous hours to have a reasonable chance of scoring a meaningful hit." Rodriguez felt his first glimmer of hope since learning about his impossible mission.
"And their return fire? That's where things get interesting."
Hawkins led him up the boarding ramp into the ship's interior, which was even stranger than its exterior. The corridors seemed to bend at impossible angles, and Rodriguez had the unsettling sensation that the ship was larger inside than outside. "The Indomitable's weapons are quantum entangled with their targets. Once we establish a lock, our shots don't travel through normal space, they simply appear at the target location. Distance, shields, armor, nothing matters.
If we can see it and lock onto it, we can hit it.
The bridge was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Traditional control stations were mixed with devices that looked like they belonged in an avant-garde art museum. The captain's chair sat in the center of a circular platform surrounded by holographic displays showing probability matrices, quantum field fluctuations, and what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of local spacetime. The crew complement is small, Hawkins continued.
Just 12 people. Any more would destabilize the quantum field.
But each crew member has been trained on systems that don't exist anywhere else in human space.
Trained how?
This ship has only existed for a year. Virtual reality simulations running in accelerated time dilation fields. Each crew member has experienced approximately 5 years of subjective training time in the past 6 months. They know this ship better than they know themselves. A voice from behind them interrupted their conversation. With respect, Dr. Hawkins, we know the ship well enough to know we're all completely insane for agreeing to crew her. Rodriguez turned to see a tall woman with lieutenant commander's stripes approaching. Her handshake was firm, her eyes alert, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen impossible things and learned to take them in stride.
Captain Rodriguez, I'm Commander Lisa Park, your XO. I've been working with the Indomitable longer than anyone else on the crew. Before you ask, yes, we all volunteered for this mission. And, yes, we all understand the odds. What made you volunteer?
Park smiled grimly.
Same thing that made you accept command, I'd imagine. Sometimes you have to do impossible things because nobody else can do them. Over the next several hours, Rodriguez met the rest of his crew. Each was a specialist in their field, handpicked not just for their skills but for their psychological profiles. The quantum superposition field, Dr. Hawkins explained, responded to the crew's mental state.
Doubt, fear, and uncertainty could destabilize the entire system. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the weapons officer, had been a theoretical physicist before joining the military. She understood the quantum targeting systems better than anyone alive, because she had helped design them. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb had previously been considered unemployable by most captains due to his tendency to modify equipment in ways that violated both regulations and common sense. On the Indomitable, his creative approach to engineering was not just tolerated but essential. Navigator Elena Vesquez had trained on experimental FTL systems that existed more in mathematical theory than physical reality. She could plot courses through quantum probability space that conventional navigation computers couldn't even comprehend. The rest of the crew were equally extraordinary, each one someone who had looked at impossible challenges and decided to make them possible instead. As Rodriguez toured the ship's systems with his new crew, he began to understand what Commander Chen had seen when she decided to stake humanity's future on a single vessel. The Indomitable wasn't just a ship, it was proof of human ingenuity in the face of impossible odds. Every system, every component, every design choice represented someone refusing to accept that something couldn't be done. Captain, Dr. Hawkins said as their tour concluded, there's one more thing you need to understand about the quantum superposition field. It doesn't just affect the ship, it affects the crew as well. When you're in active superposition, you'll experience reality as a constant flow of possibilities. You'll see potential futures, alternative presents, paths that could be taken. It can be overwhelming. Have you tested this on living subjects? I've tested it on myself, she replied quietly. During the longest trial run, I experienced 14 different versions of the same conversation simultaneously.
In some of them, I was giving this briefing to different captains.
In others, the Zephyrians had already arrived and Earth was burning. The human mind isn't really designed to process multiple reality streams, but somehow we adapt. Rodriguez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems.
Dr. Hawkins, what aren't you telling me?
She hesitated, then seemed to reach a decision. Miguel, the quantum field doesn't just show you what might happen, it shows you what will happen, across all possible timelines.
During my longest exposure, I saw every possible outcome of this mission.
In some timelines, the Indomitable wins a glorious victory and becomes the stuff of legends.
In others, she trailed off. In others? In others, we lose. Badly.
The Zephyrians adapt to our technology faster than we expected, or the quantum field destabilizes at a critical moment, or any of a dozen other things go wrong.
But, here's the thing that kept me sane during the experience. Even in the timelines where we lose, humanity doesn't give up.
They keep fighting, keep adapting, keep refusing to accept defeat. That's what makes this mission worth attempting. As Rodriguez prepared to take command of the most experimental vessel in human history, he found himself thinking about the nature of impossible odds. Throughout history, humans had faced situations where victory seemed impossible, where every rational calculation suggested surrender or extinction.
And, somehow, they had found ways to win anyway. Now it was his turn to add another chapter to that story. The Indomitable finished its final preparations as the clock counted down toward humanity's appointment with destiny.
In 43 hours, Captain Rodriguez and his crew of 12 would take their impossible ship into battle against 7 million enemies. The odds were astronomical. The technology was untested. The potential for catastrophic failure was enormous. And, somehow, Rodriguez found himself looking forward to it. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was proving that impossible was just another word for challenging. The rendezvous point was a patch of empty space 3 light-years from the nearest star, chosen specifically because there was nothing there that could be accidentally destroyed. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the massive Zephyrian fleet materialize out of hyperspace like a swarm of mechanical locusts blotting out the stars. Sensor readings confirm 7,200,000 ships, reported Navigator Vasquez, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. They're arranging themselves in a spherical formation with a diameter of approximately 50,000 kilometers.
We're at the center. Rodriguez nodded grimly. The Zephyrians weren't taking any chances.
They had positioned their fleet to ensure that no matter which direction the Indomitable tried to flee, it would face a wall of enemy fire.
Dr. Hawkins, he said into his comm unit, are we ready to activate the quantum field?
All systems are green, Captain.
The probability matrices are stable, and the crew's biometric readings indicate optimal psychological coherence. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Weapons status, Lieutenant Kim? Quantum targeting systems are online. I have firing solutions for the nearest 1,000 enemy vessels, but, sir.
Kim paused, looking up from her console with barely concealed awe. There are so many of them. Even with our advanced targeting, it would take hours to work through their entire formation. Communications, patch me through to the Zephyrian flagship. The main view screen shifted to show Warprime Zektar standing in what appeared to be a vast command chamber surrounded by holographic displays showing the tactical situation.
His mandibles clicked in what the translator rendered as satisfaction.
So, the human champion arrives. I confess curiosity about your choice of vessel. Our sensors detect significant quantum anomalies, but nothing that appears to pose a threat to our forces.
Are you prepared to face the consequences of your species' arrogance?
Warprime, Rodriguez replied calmly, by the laws of trial by combat, this engagement will determine the outcome of our territorial dispute.
Do you agree to abide by the results? When your ship is vaporized in the next 30 seconds, the hegemony will consider your species' resistance concluded. Begin the attack. The transmission ended, and Rodriguez turned to his crew.
Around him, the bridge hummed with barely contained energy as the quantum field generators came online. He could feel reality beginning to shift, to become fluid and uncertain. All hands, prepare for quantum superposition.
Dr. Hawkins, activate the field on my mark.
He took a deep breath, knowing that once they crossed this threshold, there would be no turning back.
Mark. The universe exploded into possibility.
Rodriguez felt his consciousness fracture across dozens of potential timelines, each one as real as the others.
In some, he was giving orders to fire at the Zephyrian fleet.
In others, he was already dead, the Indomitable nothing but expanding debris. In still others, the quantum field had destabilized and they were falling through dimensions that had no names. But, in the primary timeline, the one he focused his will upon, the Indomitable simply vanished. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire immediately, millions of energy beams and projectile weapons converging on the space where their target had been. But, the space was empty, containing nothing but the ghost echoes of quantum probability. Target has disappeared from all sensors, reported a Zephyrian officer on an open communication channel. Impossible. Our sensors detect quantum fluctuations but no solid matter. Find it. Zektar commanded. A ship cannot simply cease to exist. But, the Indomitable had not ceased to exist, it had begun to exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Rodriguez watched the tactical display show their position as a probability cloud, a shimmering area of space where they might be at any given moment. Weapons, he ordered, his voice echoing strangely as it carried across multiple quantum states, target the flagship. Lieutenant Kim's hands moved across her console with practiced precision, but Rodriguez could see her struggling with the sensory input from multiple timeline streams. Lock achieved. Quantum torpedo ready. Fire. The torpedo didn't travel through space in any conventional sense. It simply existed at the Indomitable's position one moment and, at the Zephyrian flagship the next, reality bending around the quantum entanglement that connected weapon to target. The massive Zephyrian command ship exploded in a brilliant flash that temporarily illuminated the entire fleet. Secondary explosions cascaded through its superstructure as critical systems overloaded, and, within moments, the largest vessel in the enemy formation was nothing but expanding gas and debris. The silence that followed was deafening. Impossible, whispered a Zephyrian voice over the open channel. No weapon can penetrate our shields without first striking them. Rodriguez felt a grim smile cross his face. Mr. Kim, target their formation leaders. Let's see how they adapt to fighting an enemy they can't see or predict. What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. The Indomitable phased in and out of reality, striking from angles that didn't exist, disappearing whenever the Zephyrians attempted to return fire. Their quantum torpedoes bypassed every defense, appearing directly inside enemy ships to detonate against vital systems. But, the Zephyrians were not defenseless. After losing 24 ships to the invisible attacker, they began to adapt. Their tactical computers started predicting probability zones, areas where the human ship was most likely to appear. They began firing spread patterns designed to saturate entire regions of space rather than targeting specific coordinates. And, slowly, terrifyingly, some of their shots began to hit. Hull breach on Deck 4, reported Chief Webb over the comm. The quantum field is holding, but we're starting to take real damage. Whatever they're doing, it's working. Rodriguez could see the pattern emerging across the probability timelines. The Zephyrians were learning, adapting their tactics to counter an enemy that existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. In several of the darker timeline streams, he watched the Indomitable's quantum field destabilize and the ship rematerialize directly into a barrage of enemy fire. Dr. Hawkins, he called, can we increase our superposition variance? Make ourselves even harder to predict? Not without risking complete dissolution. If we push the field any further, we might scatter across so many probability states that we can never reintegrate. The battle continued, and Rodriguez watched his crew adapt to fighting while experiencing multiple streams of reality simultaneously. Navigator Vasquez plotted courses through probability space that confused even the Zephyrians' most advanced tracking systems. Chief Webb rerouted power through quantum conduits that existed in some timelines but not others. The entire ship became a living example of controlled chaos. But the Zephyrians continued to adapt. Captain Kim reported, her voice strained from processing targeting data across multiple reality streams. They're using predictive algorithms now. They're firing it where we're going to be rather than where we are. Our hit rate is dropping while theirs is increasing. Rodriguez studied the tactical display, watching millions of enemy ships slowly tightening their formation, creating overlapping fields of fire that made maneuvering increasingly dangerous. In the probability streams, he could see potential futures where the Indomitable was caught in a crossfire that overwhelmed even their quantum defenses. Commander Park, he said, analysis of their tactical adaptation? They're learning faster than our projections indicated, Park replied grimly. At current rates, they'll have effective countermeasures within the next 20 minutes.
After that. She didn't need to finish the sentence.
Rodriguez felt the weight of humanity's future pressing down on him across all timeline streams. The Indomitable was an incredible achievement, a ship that redefined the possible, but it was still just one vessel against 7 million.
No amount of advanced technology could overcome those odds indefinitely. Unless they changed the rules of engagement entirely. Dr. Hawkins, he said suddenly, an idea forming across multiple probability streams simultaneously, what would happen if we inverted the quantum field? Inverted it? Captain, I'm not sure what you mean. Instead of making ourselves hard to hit, what if we made everything else hard to hit? Could we extend our quantum uncertainty field to affect their ships?
There was a long pause as Hawkins considered the implications. Theoretically possible, but incredibly dangerous. We'd be imposing our reality state on millions of other objects. The quantum cascade could destabilize local spacetime. We might accidentally create a probability zone where their ships exist in multiple states simultaneously. And ships aren't designed to exist in quantum superposition. They'd tear themselves apart from the inside as their own molecular structure became uncertain. Rodriguez looked around the bridge at his crew, seeing the same desperate determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had come this far on the strength of human ingenuity and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It seemed fitting that their final gambit would be the most audacious yet. Do it, he ordered. Invert the field and extend it to the entire enemy formation. Captain, Hawkins warned, if this goes wrong, we might destabilize reality itself in this region of space. The consequences could be Dr. Hawkins, Rodriguez interrupted gently, if we don't try, humanity dies. If we do try and it fails, humanity dies. But if we try and it works. He smiled grimly. Well, then, we'll have given the galaxy something to remember us by. The quantum field generators began to change their harmonic frequency, and Rodriguez felt reality starting to shift in ways that made his earlier experiences seem simple and straightforward. The universe was about to learn what happened when humans decided that the laws of physics were more like guidelines. The next few minutes would determine whether the Indomitable's crew were about to become heroes or the perpetrators of the most spectacular disaster in galactic history. But, as Rodriguez watched the probability streams converge toward a single, impossible moment, he found himself oddly at peace. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it on their own terms. Some things, he reflected, never changed. The moment Dr. Hawkins inverted the quantum field, reality screamed. Captain Rodriguez felt the universe fracture around him as the Indomitable's quantum superposition field expanded outward like an invisible tsunami, washing over the Zephyrian fleet at the speed of thought. What had been a localized probability anomaly affecting a single ship suddenly became a regional phenomenon encompassing 7 million vessels and 50,000 cubic kilometers of space. Field inversion complete, Hawkins reported, her voice tight with concentration as she monitored readings that shouldn't have been possible. Quantum cascade is propagating through the enemy formation. I'm reading massive probability fluctuations across their entire fleet. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Through the quantum probability streams, Rodriguez watched as Zephyrian warships began to exist in multiple states simultaneously. One moment a vessel would appear solid and real, the next it would become translucent as its quantum signature scattered across parallel timelines. The ship's own molecular structures became uncertain, their hulls phasing between different possible configurations. What is happening? Warprime Zektar's voice crackled over the communication channel, distorted by the quantum interference. Our ships are becoming uncertain. Rodriguez watched the tactical display as thousands of Zephyrian vessels began to tear themselves apart from within. Their quantum-stabilized systems, designed for normal spacetime, couldn't cope with existing in multiple probability states. Power conduits that were simultaneously conducting energy and not conducting energy overloaded and exploded. Hull plates that existed in 17 different positions at once created stress fractures that propagated through entire ship structures. Captain, Navigator Vasquez called out, her voice filled with wonder and terror, I'm tracking probability cascades throughout their formation.
The quantum uncertainty is spreading from ship to ship. Their own formation density is working against them. The closer they are to each other, the faster the field propagates. But the victory came at a cost. The Indomitable's crew was experiencing the full brunt of expanded quantum superposition, their consciousness scattered across hundreds of potential timelines. Rodriguez could feel his own awareness stretching thin as he simultaneously experienced dozens of different versions of the battle. In one timeline stream, the quantum field destabilized completely and created a black hole that consumed both fleets. In another, the Zephyrians somehow adapted to the quantum uncertainty and turned it into a weapon. In a third, the field expanded beyond the battle zone and began affecting nearby star systems. Dr. Hawkins, he managed to say across the probability streams, "How long can we maintain this field expansion?" "Unknown," she replied, and Rodriguez could hear the strain in her voice as she fought to maintain coherence across multiple reality states. "The power requirements are exponential. We're drawing energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations, but that's inherently unstable. If we push too hard, we might tear a hole in spacetime itself." On the tactical display, the Zephyrian fleet was disintegrating. Ships that had existed for centuries were becoming probability ghosts, their crews experiencing every possible moment of their lives simultaneously. The massive formation that had seemed so invincible minutes earlier was now a cloud of quantum uncertainty where solid matter flickered in and out of existence. But some vessels were adapting faster than others. Rodriguez watched as several Zephyrian heavy cruisers began modifying their shield frequencies, trying to stabilize their local spacetime. Their crews were working with desperate efficiency, and, in several probability streams, Rodriguez could see them succeeding. "They're adapting to the quantum field," Commander Park reported. "Approximately 300 ships have achieved partial stabilization. They're still affected, but they're maintaining structural integrity." "Can they fire weapons in their current state?" Rodriguez asked. "Unknown. Their targeting systems should be as disrupted as everything else, but the answer came in the form of a barrage of energy beams from the partially stabilized ships. The weapon's fire was erratic and unfocused, but some shots found their target. The Indomitable shuddered as multiple hits struck their hull, the impacts somehow more devastating than they should have been. Quantum-disrupted weapons, Chief Webb reported from engineering. When their energy beams pass through the uncertainty field, they become probability weapons. Each shot exists in multiple states, some miss, but others hit with compound force from parallel impacts. Rodriguez realized with growing alarm that the Zephyrians had accidentally discovered how to weaponize quantum uncertainty. Instead of being defeated by the field, they were learning to use it as a force multiplier. In the probability streams, he could see potential futures where the surviving Zephyrian ships turned the quantum cascade into a devastating area effect weapon. "Dr. Hawkins, we need to collapse the field. Now." "I can't," she replied, panic creeping into her voice. "The quantum cascade has become self-sustaining. It's drawing power from the probability fluctuations themselves. I've lost direct control of the system." The tactical situation was spiraling beyond anyone's ability to predict or control. The Zephyrian fleet was mostly destroyed, but the quantum field was expanding outward, threatening to engulf nearby space. The few surviving enemy ships were beginning to coordinate their attacks, using probability weapons that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. And the Indomitable itself was starting to suffer from prolonged exposure to extreme quantum uncertainty. Rodriguez could see his crew struggling to maintain coherent thought as their consciousness scattered across hundreds of possible realities. "Captain," Lieutenant Kim called out, her voice strained, "I'm detecting quantum resonance building in our own systems. If we don't stabilize soon, we might experience permanent reality dissociation. We could scatter across so many timelines that we never reintegrate." Rodriguez forced himself to focus on the primary timeline stream, pushing aside the hundreds of alternative realities that clamored for his attention. In moments like this, he understood why humanity had chosen to send only one ship. It wasn't about military strategy or tactical advantage, it was about the fundamental human ability to make impossible choices and live with the consequences. "All hands," he announced over the ship's communication system, "prepare for emergency quantum stabilization. We're going to attempt something that's never been done before. What's the plan, Captain?
Park asked. Rodriguez smiled grimly as he watched the probability streams converge toward a single, desperate possibility.
We're going to collapse every timeline into one.
All possible versions of this battle, all potential outcomes, everything.
We're going to force reality to choose a single path. Dr. Hawkins looked up from her console in alarm. Miguel, that's not just dangerous, it's theoretically impossible. The energy requirements would be enormous, and the probability mathematics alone could tear apart local spacetime.
Dr. Hawkins, Rodriguez replied calmly, in the last 3 days, we built a ship that exists in quantum superposition, fought a battle against 7 million enemies, and accidentally created a reality warping phenomenon that's consuming an entire star system.
I think we've already moved beyond theoretically impossible. The surviving Zephyrian ships were closing in, their probability weapons charging for another coordinated strike.
The quantum field continued to expand, threatening to destabilize spacetime across multiple light-years. And, somewhere in the chaos of colliding timelines, the crew of the Indomitable prepared to attempt something that would either save the galaxy or destroy it.
Rodriguez watched the probability streams showing every possible outcome of their desperate gambit. In some timelines, they succeeded and became legends.
In others, they failed catastrophically and created a quantum anomaly that persisted for thousands of years.
In a few, they somehow made the situation even worse.
But, in all timelines, they tried.
Begin quantum collapse sequence, he ordered.
All power to the probability stabilizers.
If we're going to rewrite the laws of physics, let's do it properly.
The Indomitable's quantum field generators began to emit a harmonic frequency that resonated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Reality itself began to contract, pulling together the scattered threads of possibility into a single, inevitable outcome.
The next few seconds would determine whether humanity's impossible gambit would end in triumph or tragedy.
But, as Rodriguez felt the universe begin to collapse around them, he knew that whatever happened next, they had already achieved something remarkable. They had taught the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their technology or their weapons. Sometimes it was their complete inability to understand when they were supposed to lose. The quantum field reached critical resonance, and reality prepared to make its final choice. When reality collapsed into a single timeline, it chose the impossible one. Captain Rodriguez felt the universe snap back into focus like a rubber band released after being stretched to its breaking point. The hundreds of probability streams that had been fracturing his consciousness suddenly converged into one clear, undeniable present. The quantum field around the Indomitable contracted from its massive expansion back to its original configuration, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to echo across the emptiness of space. Where 7 million Zephyrian warships had once filled the starfield, fewer than 1,000 remained. The rest had been scattered across parallel timelines during the quantum cascade, their quantum signatures so thoroughly disrupted that they simply ceased to exist in this reality. The surviving vessels hung motionless in space, their crews struggling to comprehend what had happened. "Status report," Rodriguez called out, his voice hoarse from the strain of maintaining coherence across multiple reality streams. "All primary systems functioning," Chief Webb reported, though his voice carried the exhausted tone of someone who had just experienced every possible version of an engineering crisis simultaneously. "The quantum field generators are stable but running hot. I'd recommend against any more reality warping maneuvers for the next few hours." Dr. Hawkins looked up from her console, her hair disheveled and her eyes holding the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too many timelines. "Captain, what we just did shouldn't have been possible. We collapsed approximately 40,000 probability streams into a single outcome. The mathematical implications alone will keep physicists busy for centuries." "What happened to the rest of their fleet?" Navigator Vasquez asked, studying sensor readings that showed vast regions of empty space where enemy ships should have been. "They exist," Rodriguez replied quietly, understanding flooding through him as the quantum echoes faded from his mind. "They still exist, just not here. The quantum collapse didn't destroy them, it scattered them across parallel universes. In some timelines, they won this battle. In others, they never arrived at all. But, in this timeline, the one that reality chose to preserve, only these ships remain.
The surviving Zephyrians were in chaos.
Through the communication channels, Rodriguez could hear frantic voices trying to make sense of their situation. Ships that had been part of carefully coordinated formations were now alone in empty space. Entire command structures had vanished, leaving junior officers in charge of vessels they barely understood. Warprime Zektar's voice crackled over the general frequency, distorted and confused.
What sorcery is this? Where is my fleet? Our sensors show nothing.
Empty space where 7 million ships should be. Rodriguez activated the communication system, his voice carrying across the void to reach the scattered remnants of the once mighty Zephyrian hegemony. Warprime, your fleet exists in parallel timelines where different outcomes occurred. In this reality, you brought 1,000 ships to conquer humanity. Those ships are all that remain of your armada.
Impossible.
We brought 7 million vessels.
The largest military force in galactic history. You brought 7 million ships, Rodriguez agreed.
But, you brought them to fight an enemy that refuses to accept the limitations of what's supposed to be possible.
The trial by combat has concluded.
Under Galactic Council law, the territorial dispute is resolved. There was a long silence as the implications sank in. The Zephyrian hegemony, the most powerful military force in known space, had been defeated not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through humanity's stubborn refusal to play by the established rules of warfare.
This cannot stand, Zektar finally transmitted. The hegemony will not accept defeat by means of impossible technology. We will return with reinforcements. We will adapt our tactics.
Rodriguez felt a familiar smile cross his face, the same expression he had worn when first learning about his impossible mission.
Warprime, you're welcome to try.
But, I should warn you, what you experienced today was humanity being careful.
We chose to scatter your ships across parallel timelines instead of destroying them outright. Next time, we might be less considerate.
The threat was implicit but clear.
Humanity had just demonstrated the ability to manipulate reality itself as a weapon.
Any future aggression would be met with consequences that the galaxy's conventional military thinking couldn't even comprehend. Dr. Hawkins activated a private channel to the bridge crew.
Miguel, I should point out that we can't actually do this again.
The quantum field generators are operating at 15% efficiency, and we've exhausted most of our exotic matter reserves. What we just accomplished was probably a one-time achievement.
Dr. Hawkins, Rodriguez replied with a grin, do you really think I'm going to tell them that?
As the surviving Zephyrian ships began their withdrawal, their crews undoubtedly carrying tales of impossible defeat back to their homeworld, Rodriguez reflected on what humanity had accomplished. They had won not through superior numbers or advanced weapons, but through the one advantage that no alien species seemed to understand, the uniquely human ability to look at impossible odds and decide to make them possible instead. Communications, patch me through to Earth Command. Commander Chen's image appeared on the main view screen, her expression carefully controlled as she waited for news of humanity's fate. Behind her, Rodriguez could see the Orbital Command Center's staff watching with barely concealed anxiety.
Commander Chen, mission accomplished. The Zephyrian fleet has been defeated and withdrawn.
The territorial dispute has been resolved in humanity's favor.
The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of someone dropping a coffee cup in the background.
Chen stared at the screen as if trying to process information that didn't match any possible scenario her staff had modeled. Captain Rodriguez, she said slowly, please confirm.
You engaged 7 million enemy vessels with a single ship and achieved victory? Affirmative, Commander.
Though I should note that we had some help from the laws of quantum mechanics.
It turns out that reality is more flexible than most people realize.
Across the communication channel, Rodriguez could see tears of relief streaming down Chen's face as the impossible news sank in.
Humanity would survive.
Earth would remain free.
The colonies in the Kepler system would continue their research in peace. But, more importantly, the galaxy had just learned something new about the species that called themselves human. Captain, Chen managed to say, how soon can you return to Earth?
I suspect there are going to be a lot of questions about what happened here today. Rodriguez looked around the bridge at his crew, seeing the exhaustion and wonder in their eyes as they contemplated what they had accomplished. They had redefined the possible, challenged the fundamental assumptions of military strategy, and proved that sometimes the best way to win an impossible fight was to change the rules of reality itself.
We'll head home immediately, Commander.
But I suspect this is just the beginning. Word of today's battle will spread throughout the galaxy.
Other species will want to understand how humanity achieved the impossible. Some will want to learn from us. Others will want to test their strength against ours. And we'll be ready for them?
Rodriguez smiled as he watched the last of the Zephyrian ships disappear into hyperspace, carrying news of humanity's victory to a galaxy that was about to discover why humans sent only one ship.
Commander, we're human. We turned physics into a weapon and made reality our ally. I'm pretty sure we'll figure something out.
As the Indomitable began its journey back to Earth, Rodriguez found himself thinking about the nature of impossible victories. Throughout history, humans had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable and somehow found ways to overcome them. Today had been no different, except that this time the stakes had been the survival of the entire species. But the principle remained the same. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't calculate the probability of success, they calculated how to make success inevitable. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson firsthand. In the years that followed, the battle of the probability fields would become legend. Military academies across dozens of worlds would study the engagement, trying to understand how a single ship had defeated the largest fleet in galactic history. Physicists would analyze the quantum mechanics involved, leading to breakthroughs in reality manipulation that would revolutionize space travel and communications. But, more than the technical achievements, the galaxy remembered the lesson that humanity had taught them that day. They learned that humans possess something no other species seemed to share, the absolute inability to understand when they were supposed to lose. And, perhaps most importantly, they learned why, when humanity was threatened with extinction by overwhelming odds, they chose to send only one ship. Because sometimes, one ship crewed by beings who refused to accept the impossible was more dangerous than a million vessels crewed by those who accepted the limitations of what could be done. The Indomitable returned to Earth as heroes, but Captain Rodriguez and his crew knew that their greatest victory wasn't in the battle they had won. It was in the message they had sent to a galaxy full of species who were just beginning to understand what it truly meant to be human. Some fights, they had proven, were worth taking even when you couldn't win.
Especially when you couldn't win.